We'll be starting our next segment in just a moment, but we'd like to let you all know that ASPAVO is a nonprofit corporation. And if you'd like to participate, one of the ways that you can help to support it, obviously, is to take the seminars. But also, we are a nonprofit and we do accept donations gladly. We'll also make a suggestion that if you do make a donation, that you make it a master number. If it's going to be $10, make it $11. If it's going to be $45 or $50, make it $44. Work with it. Work with the numbers so that we can reflect that back to you as well. And we truly appreciate your being a part of the family in this way. ASPAVO, everyone.
In January of 2008, the citizens of Stephenville, Texas, were astounded to witness a series of unexplained lights and craft flying over their skies, hotly pursued by military jets. These sightings set off a series of events that quickly became one of the most controversial and well-documented UFO cases in U.S. history. Author Ken Cherry is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and former Texas State Director for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. At the time of the Stephenville event, he headed up a team of investigators that conducted extensive research and analysis of the mass sighting for an entire year. Ken Cherry's book, Marc, Slade Investigates the Stephenville UFO, which is based on real events, is a hair-raising tale of secret underground installations, UFOs, ETs, men in black, sinister plots, and shadow government agencies vying for control of the country. How much of that story is true, and how much of it is fiction? Here's Ken Cherry to tell us. Ken Cherry, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie. Happy to be here.
Ken, let's start by talking a little bit about your background and what sparked your interest in UFOs and led to your 10-year directorship of MUFON.
Well, I had no idea of the significance of the event at the time, but when I was about 7 years old, we lived on a ranch just south of the Dallas area. And in those days, kids were pretty independent and you could spend a whole day without seeing your parents. But at any rate, I was out on the property and came into a clearing, and slowly crossing the horizon was a silvery object in the air. And of course, at that age, I didn't know exactly what it was, but the next thing I saw was another craft, which was a jet screaming down toward this object. And I don't know if it was a glint of the sun between them or what, but there seemed to be some sort of exchange between the two craft. And the next thing I knew, the pilot of the jet ejected, and the jet, there was smoke coming out of it. It crashed, and the discussion whenever my parents got together with neighbors was always about the rescue of this pilot from the trees. His parachute had caught up in there. But apparently, it was very thinly populated in this area where we lived, and I must have been the only one that witnessed this craft that I learned later was, a typical UFO, flying saucer. So, that's one of those memories that sticks with you, like, where were you when JFK was assassinated? I mean, it's just something you'll never forget. And, all through the years, I read as much as I could about, the visitors from space. But I took my family to Roswell one year. And there at the museum, there was some information about the Mutual UFO Network. And so upon our return back home to the Fort Worth area, I contacted the Mutual UFO Network and became a member. And within less than 2 years, I was appointed as the state director. Um, it was an organization in probably tatters here in the state of Texas. When I took it over, we had about 25 active members, and I think when I left, we had around 250. But at one point, we had, I think, 43 field investigators spread throughout the state. So over the 10 years prior to Stephenville, we'd investigated a number of fairly high profile cases that put me in touch with a number of the folks from the media. So over that period of time, I became known as the go-to guy if there was a UFO in the skies that was reported over Texas. So quite fascinating.
Did you actually witness the Stephenville UFO event?
No, I did not. It was quite an experience, though, talking to the witnesses I personally spoke to. I stopped counting at 150. It was just incredible. Stephenville is a rural community of about 15,000 folks, and the main industry there is dairy farming. Although very few dairy farmers can make a living off of just their own few cows. So most of the folks there have day jobs. They get up very early in the morning to do their chores, tend to their cows, go to work. They come back, and then they put in a few more hours working with their cows. So these are very hard-working, industrious folks who, not prone to flights of fancy. They don't sit around watching cable, sci-fi channel at night. But there is a college there, so it's also known as a college town. But among the witnesses that we had, there were just no kiddos. I mean, the very few young people that were counted as witnesses were generally with a parent whenever they, whenever with a mom or dad when they both saw the UFO. So these were, for the most part, mature individuals, a gray-haired set primarily. So they had a lot of experience and were very mature and they were very credible.
So in the immediate aftermath, the military gave conflicting stories about the F-16s chasing the UFO. What was that all about?
Well, it was pretty clear that they were trying to make the story go away with such a quick response that this major who was quoted as saying he was over 90% certain that this was an optical illusion created by two commercial aircraft coming in close proximity, which there were just so many holes in that story. It was just amazing. But these reports were coming from a four-county area, and so certainly people from those large distances could not have viewed the same optical illusion, nor would they have, since they were at different angles at any rate. But I think the main thing that he was trying to accomplish was deny that there were F-16s there in the area in pursuit of this UFO. And of course, later we proved that there were F-16s, and they had to fess up and admit, but they still tried to deny that there was a UFO.
Now, you've sent us a couple of images. We've got one that is a composite created by 3 police officers.
Yes, and we had a fairly significant group of law enforcement officers, a sheriff's deputy, a constable, which is a type of law enforcement officer in Texas that serves warrants and picks up bad guys. And then there were 3 police officers who were out on patrol in different parts of the city, remote, areas away from each other. When they came back to the station house, they were all excited, saying, "You'll never guess what I saw." And the other one said, "No, guess what I saw." So the 3 of them compared notes and sat down with a draftsman's program, I suppose, whatever it was, and came up with what they agreed upon was that they had seen. And so this is the type of trained observers, very, very credible witnesses that we had that came forward. And of course, later on, when we did have radar studies, we did show that there was a UFO in the area where the witnesses said it was. At the time, they said it was. It wasn't transponding. One of the officers said he was sitting in his car with a radar gun, trying to catch speeders. And suddenly everything just went completely quiet. And he couldn't figure out what's going on, And he kind of looked around and he looked up in the sky, and he said there was this absolutely enormous craft just looming in the air. And he didn't know what to do. He said, I was just kind of stunned. He said, I decided I pointed my radar gun out the window at this thing, and he said it went, the first click was like 13 miles an hour. I forget the exact number, but it was very low. And he said then the next instant it just shot off. My gun couldn't even read the speed. So, these 3 particular police officers we did talk to. They did speak to the Learning Channel was one of the places where they, gave their accounts, although with their faces blurred. And they were afraid to go public and that they might be ridiculed and so forth. But we did have others that were very public about what they had seen. So sorry, the images turned the wrong way, but I think your audience gets the idea.
Oh, yeah, you can clearly see those lights, 3 different pictures. The organisation Aqua in your book, Marc Slade Investigates, is clearly MUFON. Do you believe that the CIA, FBI, NSA, Homeland Security have infiltrated MUFON in real life as they did in your book?
Going back to 1952, the CIA impaneled what they call the Robertson Panel to study the UFO phenomenon because earlier in the year, from July 12th to, I believe, July the 29th, an armada, which is about the only way to describe it, an armada of UFOs flew over the nation's capital in view of tens of thousands of people. And I interviewed 2 witnesses who were actually there. One was an elderly gentleman, and one who was working as an analyst at the Pentagon, and another was a young girl and her father who was a major at the time and a World War II aero pilot. But they all witnessed these things, and with jets chasing them. At any rate, this made such a stir back in those days that the Robertson panel studied the phenomenon and made a number of recommendations. And one of them was that the UFO groups of today should be infiltrated, watched, surveilled. And so they actually did. And NICAP was one of the big UFO groups of today. And soon after this recommendation, that was just loaded with intelligence types. A Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was the first DCI, the first CIA chief, was actually on the board. An aide to Barry Goldwater, who was a longtime CIA employee, was a member of NICAP. And there were many, many other folks there. Eventually, for a number of reasons, NICAP collapsed. But I think and there's other examples. APRO, I forget. There's some others that they also infiltrated, but that all eventually went away. But I think what they learned from the experience, and I'm saying the intelligence community, was that um, one of their other directives from this panel, from the Robertson panel, was that they educate the public. In other words, control the media, and I can go over that later. But they mentioned using the Disney company. This was even back in the early 50s, and Arthur Godfrey, who was a big radio TV personality of the day, to to use them to get their message out to the public in the way that they wanted the public to view UFOs and ETs and so forth. And of course, a lot of it back in those days was deny, poo-poo, ridicule, whatnot. But at any rate, I think with that as their secondary mission, what they decided was better to have a viable UFO organization that would collect data and sighting reports from the public, and then they could manage how these things were investigated, who investigated them, and where the data actually went, and if there were any residue or any kind of a proof or technology, then they would control it. And so, I was a state director for over 10 years. I said, it was 11 and a half or so. So for the nitpickers, I'd just say over 10 years. But during this investigation, so many things happened that were contrary to my mission of investigating this mass sighting, that it made me look inward at the MUFON. And what I found was a very large number of people from intelligence community, where there was the two former directors, international directors, were former military intelligence. The founder, Walt Andrus's brother, was allegedly a career employee of the CIA. John Schuessler, who was the international director for many years, was a top project manager with NASA and had very high clearances. And, I mean, the examples just went on and on. I found people from the DOD, the FBI, as I said, military intelligence, NSA, and you really have to just sort of suspend your powers of disbelief if you think that all these people just happen to be members of this organization, just as a social outlet. So,
Sure.
yeah, I had my suspicions.
In Marc Slade's world, it's very dangerous to be a UFO enthusiast or researcher. Is that the case in real life?
Well, it's kind of interesting that when my book came out, it's listed on Amazon. And one of the things they do for authors is show where the purchases take place. And the first two copies were purchased in Washington, D.C. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because, I know kind of the demographic makeup of D.C. and, it's not really, it seemed odd. But one of the movies that Robert Redford did that I enjoyed the most was called 3 Days of the Condor, where basically they were just, they thought, oh, well, we're just librarians because all we do is scan through books that come out as they come out to make sure there's no national secrets or codes, any kind of spycraft, anything in there. And then, of course, while he's out fetching lunch for everybody one day, he comes back and the place is shot up. So, but at any rate, that was based on a real program that they have of reviewing those types of things. So hopefully somebody there, CIA, NSA, enjoyed my books because I've seen some more sold in D.C. But as far as the intimidation is concerned, soon after that, my computer came under denial of service attacks on several occasions and crashed it. I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a retired military intelligence officer one night, and he was on a secure phone, and I don't have anybody on an extension or anything here, but we just kept having, I said, look, Jan, I think, I'm sorry. I just had this feeling somebody's listening to our conversation. And he says, I do too. And he said, last time we talked, I had the same feeling. I called up my service provider, who's in this area is called Charter Communications. And I said, you're going to think I'm nuts, but I believe somebody's listening in on my conversations. And I was very pleased at the reaction of the young man. He said, Mr. Terry, when do you think it was last? And I said, just 5 minutes ago when I got off, on my last conversation. And he said, well, just hold on a minute. Let me run some tests. And he came back and he said, we're going to send a technician out first thing in the morning. And he said, there is evidence of telnet activity on your conversations going back for some time. And so I said, well, what the hell is telnet? And he said, I said, is it a physical bug? And he said, no, it's a program that allows somebody to remote into your conversations at will. And I went, oh my God. Well, they came out, they took care of that, and they took care of the DNS attacks. But I found out that when you have a provider nowadays that gives you telephone, internet, and television, that they're all subject to attack. And so one day, however, I was sitting here and the phone rang, and it was a neighbor across the street. And she said, she's a retired flight attendant. She said, there was a guy sitting out there in an unmarked panel truck at the edge of your property for some time. And he was just looking down. I couldn't see what he's doing, but he looked exactly like these special ops guys that we used to fly back on these charter flights from the Middle East. And she said, there's just something about him. And I said, oh, well, okay, he's not there now. And so I got in my car and I pulled out of the driveway and started heading down the street. And he said, the next turn, my GPS said, turn right at the next street. And I went, wait a minute, I didn't program my GPS. And so as I'm going down the street, it's giving me another instruction. I said, what is going on? So I punched destination, and my GPS is trying to tell me to go to the emergency room at the local hospital. And so I thought, well, gosh, if that's not a hint, I don't know what is. And so to confirm that, a couple of days later, I get my bill from Charter. And in many years, I've never rented a movie, and there was these movie rentals on there. And I called them up and I said, look, there's an error in my bill. So the lady looks and she says, yes, I see you've never rented one, so we'll take them off. And I said, by the way, what are they? And she said, oh, they're those horrible slasher movies.
Oh, dear.
And so, there's been all these subtle attempts to intimidate me. The worst that I had was a black SUV riding right against my bumper, no matter how fast I sped up. I don't know how many times I turned. And finally, I lost him going at a breakneck speed, but it was only because I knew of a break in a boulevard that allowed me to make a quick U-turn. Of course, I'm sure they know where I live, so that was only a temporary maneuver. But at any rate, I was doing an interview like this one time, and I'd forgotten to unplug the phone, and it rang, and I looked over, and it said City of Keller. I went, what the heck is City of Keller doing calling? And I was just finishing up, so I picked it up, and the lady said, this is Keller Police Department. Would you please go to your front door to allow the officers in? And I went, what? Yeah, and she said, someone there called 911. So anyway, it turns out that they also have been making calls displaying my phone number. She said it was a silent 911 call, which means that they only got my number, and that's how they traced it. So,
So it is
so
dangerous.
far, yeah, so far it's just intimidation, and hopefully it doesn't go any further.